Hello there, AP Language and Composition. Mr. Deary here to talk about the modes of discourse with you. The modes of discourse that we're going to look at are a way of thinking about and structuring a text as well as analyzing it, specifically in the nonfiction context, to see how it's put together. Modes of discourse look at how a text is structured or speech is structured to help figure out what the author's intention is. It's a form of arrangement that we're going to study here. And as you're going through this, I want you to think about your end product at the end of this lecture. If you're watching this at the beginning of the school year, you're most likely about to start assignment 6, which is the modes of discourse application. As we're going through each mode, what I would recommend having in hand as we're kind of doing some close reading of this video and these notes is a method or a way of you thinking about where and how you could see this being applied in your own life. How could you see this being applied in the classroom or in your work life or anywhere else, so that way you can see a relevancy for this. As you're going to see, there are 8 modes of discourse, and we're trying to find an application for each one of them. So without further ado, let's go ahead. We'll take a look at these 8 modes of discourse and kind of go from there. So right off the bat, what I want to point out is that these are ways of thinking when approaching a text, and these are not limited to a single approach, meaning that just because you find an example of authority doesn't mean that the entire text is built on authority. Authority can be paired up with exemplification, definition, and process analysis to show the process, examples, and definition of a given structure here to further illustrate and prove a point. Now, our 8 modes of discourse are definition, compare and contrast, division and classification, exemplification, cause and effect, process analysis, testimony, and authority. So we're going to take a look at all 8 of these real quick here this morning. And as you're doing this and as you're working through this, think about, again, where and how you can see these being used. First one we have is definition. Simply put, the speaker provides information in one of the 2 methods. A concrete definition. That should be fairly obvious. We're thinking Webster's, we're thinking Google Dictionary. We're looking at the literal definition of a word. But definition also has a sneaky way of being used in the second manner, and that is by giving you details and elements and pieces to describe something without actually describing it directly. This is incredibly effective for concepts or ideas, but it can also be used when you're trying to say something indirectly and informing your audience of it as well. If you're trying not to come outright and just say a problem. You see a lot of satirists use that method as well. Now, this is very commonly used in early portions of a speech or early portions of a text to help clarify terms and standards being used throughout the piece. You see thesis, subject, and occasionally the purpose of the discourse. We're going to define what feminism, or we're going to define what egalitarianism is. We want to know what this term is before we talk about it. So definition is pretty cut and dry. Where do you see this being effective? How do you see it being effective? The next is comparison and contrast. And this is one that you've done so often in elementary, it's probably almost second nature at this point. This is very common in the high school classroom. And it focuses on the elements within a message, being that you're going to look at how things are juxtaposed or put next to one another. You're going to look at similarities and differences. You're going to look at commonalities. You're going to look at things that stand in stark opposition. You're trying to find middle ground, or you're trying to find the no man's land. And also just talk about the relationship between two items. Between hot and cold, there is lukewarm. But without that comparison and contrast, it's not as easy to talk about that. So by looking at polar ends or looking at where there's crossover, we can find a new way to discuss and explore information. Division and classification. This is more scientifically based and more of a science mind. So if you are not a natural English student, if you're somebody who's like, I understand this, I'm okay at it, but I'm geared like a scientist, great, this is for you. This is breaking things into categories, seeing that there are different ways of, I don't want to say classifying, but ways of putting things into groups and orders and then separating them out. My daughter, as a toddler, does this with her toys. We'll put fruits in one pile and her vegetables in another from her play kitchen. We'll do this with the Legos. We've sorted and divided by colors, by shapes, by sizes. We've been able to do lots of different ways of breaking this apart. Now, this one you might have to pause for a moment, though, and say, how is this functionally applicable in writing? How can I use this as I'm describing something? You can probably pretty easily see this as in high school if I were to start saying by freshman, sophomore, junior, or seniors, if I were to look at things through those lenses. You could additionally kind of get a view of this when you're talking about varsity or JV at the athletic sense, the first chair versus the subsequent chairs in music. By breaking things up into different responsibilities or different attributes, you can probably also see real quick how definition and compare and contrast could very easily work well with this one. So division and classification might not be the first one you jump to always, but there is a wealth of usage that you can pull out in proper and certain circumstances. Exemplification, this one is pretty straightforward. Excuse me, pardon the yawn there. A series of examples, turning a general idea into a concrete idea or illustrating points of an argument. This is saying, look, I'm going to say blank, but I want to show you how everything works moving forward. Specifically, looking at how a definition can be played out through an example, looking at how specific reasoning or specific pieces of evidence can be used in a general application, or as you see there, a more general conclusion. Exemplification uses examples to prove the point through the examples. It's a nicer way of saying, it's a nice way of using, instead of saying, look, here's all my reasons, I'm right. It's look at all these instances and look at how it shows that I'm right. The evidence used is what is persuasive here, not the structure. So exemplification, again, another one that works really well when paired with other modes, and really one that's quite effective on its own. For cause and effect, this is one that is used frequently and abused even more frequently. What we want to avoid are false connections or false correlations to cause and effect. For example, you could say that it's raining today, and that means that Mr. Deary is going to give a test just because the last time it rained, I gave a test. The rain does not cause that effect of a test. Most likely the calendar, the schedule, or pacing does. But this mode focuses on the relationship between the outcome and the action, what we're doing or what is happening versus what has happened or what will happen. You can either work from the effect backwards to the causes or look at all the causes and propose a possible or likely or confirmed effect. Now, you really, I want to stress this again, need to evaluate that relationship, because without a clear relationship, without really understanding the cause and effect, you can very easily kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you're using this in a speech. So as you're doing this, be aware of that. Make sure that we're looking at the thought process here and that you're not just making false correlations when necessary to prove a point. Process analysis sounds complicated, but it's really simple. This is a step-by-step explanation. It's usually, as you see, they're more expository than persuasive. It is not going to be like let's go win an argument by talking about step-by-step process. No, this is, you want to effectively communicate information with somebody, but you don't need to do it necessarily in the most persuasive way. You can be persuasive by a step-by-step process, and you could probably also see how this could be applied very easily to the previous what we had with cause and effect. If this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, in this sequence and order, this step-by-step process, an effect can happen. A very cool way to kind of pair those two together. Now, connotative language may establish a position or a tone. So how you're looking at things in the context of that moment might establish that this process is the right one. As an athletics coach, I have a process for training that I follow, and the way that I talk about it is meant to be persuasive to my athletes, to show them that it works, to show them that I believe in it, so that they will try it and buy into it. Again, this isn't manipulation, but this is using process analysis in that situation to show the effectiveness of a certain system or method or model. Second to last is testimony. This is a first-hand account of an event or experience by and this is important, the everyman. You can give testimony to a fight. You can give testimony to a crime. You can give testimony about your trip or your experience or your whatever because you are seeing it. The difference between testimony and authority is this concept of the everyman. In testimony, that means this is just some regular person talking about or showing what has happened. You see this so often being used in talk shows or in infomercials where we have the person who's coming to try, the person is coming to try an item or an idea, and then they get shot back. It's like, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. It cleaned my cabinets. It did this. It did that. Or look at how effective this tool is at doing these tasks that I struggled with. The everyman shows how it can be effective for you and I. Now, let's compare that to authority here. It's the exact same thing of a firsthand account, but this time it's provided by a person that has qualified credentials that relate to the experience. So instead of everyman, you hear from the specialist. So testimony is everyman, authority is the specialist. You watching a video of modes of discourse produced by an AP language student from 2 years ago would be an example of testimony. By listening to this video, you are listening to an appeal to authority. Now, you might also be realizing right away here that this is also a nice way of tying in an appeal to ethos as well. That character, that moral, that credibility. Authority builds on that. So instead of just saying the author uses ethos, the author uses the ethos of their position. The author uses their credentials to relay a sense of credibility or believability to their message. Now we're being able to build upon simple concepts like the Aristotelian appeals and use them with the modes of discourse. So what you see here with all these examples are the 8 modes of discourse. As you're moving forward, realize that not everyone is effective for every position. There are certain times where you don't really want division and classification. You're going to want process analysis. If you've ever tried to cook or bake something, you've seen process analysis after you get the list of ingredients as you walk step by step. And equally on that note, if you've ever tried to use a bad recipe, you can see very quickly how a poor use of a mode of discourse, even if it is the appropriate one, can derail a message. I have burned dinners and ruined meals because of poor instructions that weren't clear or vague, or they rushed things or assumed that I would read the entirety of it first. So take a look at these modes of discourse, and as you're going to start in assignment 006 here, think about specific, purposeful applications for each of these. With that, let's go ahead and jump to this. Good luck. If you need any help, please come see Mr. Deary immediately. And hopefully you found this video and this overview helpful. Thanks a bunch.